A recent interview entitled "Getting Beyond Zionism" has attracted much attention and raised eyebrows in certain quarters, especially in religious Zionist circles. Can the rabbi please elaborate on this topic?
Allow me to begin with a story that I have related on a number of occasions. Many years ago, on a visit to Australia, I was a guest in someone's home, at someone's Shabbat table, Sabbath table, and I was asked to say some words of Torah, what's called in Hebrew a Devar Torah. The weekly Torah portion was Yithro. In that portion, we find the pasuk, the verse, where Hashem speaks to the Jewish people through Moshe and says to them, Wa'atem tiyuli mamlechet kohanim v'roi kadosh, and you shall be, for my purpose, a nation or a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And I should add that the home where I was being hosted was a Chabad or Lubavitch ultra-Orthodox Hasidic home. So, quoting that verse, I said, we learn from this pasuk that the Jewish people is required to establish a state in the land of Israel. This is stated by Hashem to the Jewish people before they receive the Torah. It is, as it were, a precondition, and it is the underpinning of the entire Torah, so I explained. The grandson of the master of the home immediately got very agitated and said, wait a minute, I've never heard such a thing. I've never heard that there is a mitzvah, a commandment in the Torah for us to establish a state in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. And I said to him, well, that's precisely my point. This pasuk says exactly that. It says, Wa'atem tiyuli mamlechet kohanim. The word mamlechet literally means a kingdom. Now, I explained to the people at the meal, a kingdom was not only the typical, but was the only form of political entity that existed in ancient times. All countries were kingdoms because they were ruled by kings. Nowadays, most countries, most states are not kingdoms, and therefore we refer to them by the term state or country or republic. And in modern Hebrew, we refer to a state as a medina, not a kingdom, not a mamlacha. But when the Torah says mamlacha, mamlechet kohanim, a kingdom of priests, it means to say a national sovereign entity, which is being described as one that contains or is led in some way by priests, by special holy people. And I continued to explain that the overarching purpose and aim of Torah Judaism is that the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, establish a state or a kingdom in their land that was promised to them by God, by Hashem, the land of Israel, and that state be governed and be imbued with the spirit of the Torah, that it be governed according to the rules, the precepts, the commandments of the Torah. This is the aim of the Jewish people, enunciated clearly by the Torah before the Torah was even given to the Jewish people. In other words, not only is the Jewish people entitled to self-determination, to living in their ancestral homeland as a sovereign nation, as other nations do, the Jewish nation is required to do so by its ancestral religion, by the Torah, by Hashem, who took them out of Egypt for that purpose. And therefore, it goes without saying that the establishment of a Jewish nation-state in the land of Israel is a central aspect of the Torah. In fact, I recall, as I speak now, that one of the first public lectures that I gave well over 30 years ago was entitled "The Centrality of Eretz Yisrael, the Land of Israel, in Judaism." And therefore, it goes without saying that any Jew whose world outlook, whose value system and understanding of life and history is rooted in the Torah, most definitely understands and believes that the Jewish people must live in their land, in the land of Israel, and must live as a sovereign nation in their country. This is hardly, therefore, a new idea. In fact, as we said, it was stated even before the Jewish people received the Torah. In other words, nearly 3,500 years ago. And it follows, therefore, that a Torah Jew hardly needed a movement that came into being in the 1890s called Zionism to know and to appreciate this basic elementary fact of Jewish existence. The problem, however, is that the term Zionism means different things to different people. Some people confuse Zionism with the basic concept and almost precondition of Judaism, that the Jewish people have a homeland that was bequeathed to them by Hashem, by the Creator, that the Jewish people belong in that land, that that land belongs to them and only to them, and that they are required to establish their sovereign national existence in that homeland. All of those ideas are, without a doubt, essential to Judaism and have been understood to be so by all Jews from time immemorial. It is true that during the many centuries, in fact millennia, of the Jewish nation's exile from their homeland, a very long and bitter exile, many, and perhaps most Jews, had become accustomed to living in foreign lands, and many had apparently almost given up hope of ever returning to their homeland. It is certainly true that not many Jews devoted much thought to the practicalities of bringing about their return and redemption. And here I will mention an historical fact that is generally unknown with regards to Moses Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn was a Jew living in Germany in the second half of the 18th century, according to the Gregorian calendar. He was one of the leaders of the Jewish community, a well-known religious figure, philosopher, and he also had many connections in the non-Jewish world. In 1770, it was suggested to him by a German statesman that perhaps the Jewish people could re-establish their national existence in their homeland, in the land of Israel. To which Moses Mendelssohn replied that after so many centuries of exile and unfamiliarity with their homeland, having become so accustomed to living an exilic existence, that this was no longer a practical option. And it was for this reason that Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism, was viewed by many Jews in the world, particularly in Eastern Europe, as a kind of Mashiach, a Messiah figure. Because, as it were, out of nowhere, he reminded the Jews of their ancient belief in their return to their land. And he suggested that this was actually something that could be achieved. And this caused a tremendous awakening within the Jewish people. In truth, the Jews should not have needed to be reminded by an assimilated Jew by the name of Theodor Herzl that they had a homeland and that they had to pick themselves up and go there and re-establish their national sovereign existence and create a Jewish nation-state. But the reality was that they did need this reminding. And so it was that the topic of establishing, or re-establishing more precisely, Jewish national existence in their ancient homeland became a topic of everyday discussion and was no longer a pipe dream. The Zionist movement was therefore a necessary stage in the historical development of the Jewish people in recent times. Without the Zionist movement of Theodor Herzl and his colleagues, it is difficult to imagine how the Jewish people would have re-established their national existence in their ancient homeland. But this does not mean that one should accept, together with this reaffirmation of that which was obvious to all Torah Jews, that which had always been an essential part of the Torah, one does not need to accept all the ideological baggage and presuppositions that came with this political program. The authentic Torah position was stated clearly by the illustrious Rav Saadia Gaon over 1,000 years ago. He wrote in his book Mivhar HaEmunot VaDe'oth that En umathenu uma ela b'thorotheha. Our nation, our nationhood, our nationalism is only Jewish nationalism when it is rooted in our Torah. And let us not forget that at the very first Zionist conference, the resolution was proposed and accepted that Zionism had nothing to do with the Torah, with the Jewish religion. In other words, with thousands of years of Jewish civilization and culture. In the words of the resolution in Hebrew, En letzionut davar im hadat. Zionism has nothing to do with religion, with Judaism. And therefore, a nationalism which aims to subvert the Jewish people's national civilization, culture, history, and replace it with something else, something new and something different, not rooted in the Torah, cannot be described as authentic Jewish nationalism. Of course, the Jewish people are entitled to a state. More than that, they are obligated to establish such a state, to reconstitute their national existence in their homeland. Of course, the Jewish people must have an army and must have all the various forms of national apparatus in order to further the aims and the purposes of the Jewish people. But all of this has to be rooted in the Torah. This was the point that I was expressing in that previous discussion. We therefore need to see ourselves as post-Zionists, not in the sense that has become commonplace when we hear the term post-Zionism, which refers to an extreme, radical, left-wing, anti-Zionist and anti-Jewish perspective, which denies the unique connection between the Jewish people and their homeland, which denies the right of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, to all of the land of Israel, and to that no other nation has a similar legitimate claim. And therefore, post-Zionism is the term used to describe those who do not really believe in the existence of a Jewish state in the land of Israel. We, on the other hand, when I say we, I mean those of us who adhere to the Torah, who view all of existence, all of life, all of Jewish history, and Jewish destiny through the lens of Torah, we should describe ourselves as post-Zionists in the sense that we are graduates of Zionism. We fully recognize that the Zionist movement was a necessary and essential step and stage in the Jewish people's history, that without this historical episode, without Theodor Herzl's drive to convince the Jewish people that returning to the land and reconstituting their sovereign existence was a practical and real world possibility. Recognizing that this was so, we also recognize that Zionism did not and cannot and never will replace true, authentic Judaism, and that the Jewish people today require something beyond the very limited goals, aims, and terms of reference of political Zionism as it was expressed and as it was understood by its founders. We must begin to train ourselves, our children, and our friends to think in these redemptive post-Zionist terms. Because while we recognize that Zionism was a necessary episode in the Jewish people's history, we also perceive and see clearly that in order to achieve the Jewish people's true destiny, to achieve the Mamlechet Kohanim and Goy Kadosh, the nation of priests, a holy nation, as described in the Torah, a different, more profound, much more majestic, Torah-based ideology is what we require.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.